And I want to look at three questions in particular. So one is, how much local economic growth can we expect at the city level? What can we expect to happen? Secondly, when it does occur and when we're successful, what does it look like? What can we really expect from economic growth? And then thirdly, and probably the most important question, how do cities make it happen? How do they facilitate economic growth? So when we look globally, we can see some incredible instances of economic growth. This is Changsha, a city in inland China, 2015, in a 10-year period. I mean, this is just the western part of the city. Amazing transformation. So you might say, well, this is, China, they can do it in China. We can't do it in Europe or Central Asia. But a little bit closer to here, in eastern Turkey, the city of Gaziantep, in 2005, this is one of the organized industrial zones in the north of the city, where they make carpets, actually very similar to the ones here, very large machine-made carpets. No comment on the taste of the design. And then 10 years later, again, they had built a whole new organized industrial zone, and then another whole new organized industrial zone. And each one is almost as big as the previous ones combined. So the rate of growth is absolutely astonishing. And importantly, I mean, the buildings that you see there are not warehouses, they are factories producing largely machine-made carpets and some other industries as well. Food processing is a big one there, and then also footwear to some extent. So tremendous success can be achieved, and even very close to this region, and including, as we said already, Tbilisi. So local growth can occur very fast, and there are many more examples. These are from the European Union. The eastern part of the European Union, the peripheral regions, they have achieved GDP growth per capita of about 10% a year in some cases. We're talking Constanța in Romania, or Brasov, or Wrocław in Poland. But also performance is very variable. So as well as those tremendous success stories, you have some extremely slow growing cities and even shrinking cities. So here, looking at jobs growth, GDP growth, household income growth, it can be extremely fast or it can be very slow. And what we're showing there is the maximum and the minimum rates per year, which is huge. And even within the same country, you can get cities growing extremely fast and cities which are doing very poorly. So the first question, we can see there's a lot of variation. When growth does occur, the second question, what does it look like? So we looked at data on 750 cities globally, and we found that there was something different about the fast-growing cities in terms of the sectors that were growing in the cities. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen is 90% of cities, the majority of cities, and in the fastest growing cities, the top 10%, it's particular sectors, agribusiness, tourism, light manufacturing, ICT, which are growing faster. And what is different about these sectors is that they can be exported, they're tradable, and they allow the size of the local economy to be expanded. That's very different to the grey bars, which are non-tradable goods and services. So shopping, local services, you might think of plumbing or hairdressing and so on, which are obviously essential to the economy, and usually they are the biggest part of the economy, but growth in those services can only go so far. There's only so much money that can circulate locally, but to really expand the economy, you need more revenues from outside the city or outside the local authority. The other thing we notice looking globally is that sectors grow at different rates from each other. So if we are expecting the whole economy to grow at the same rate, it probably will not happen. You will probably see particular sectors of the economy, whether it's the green economy, as Knut was talking about, or food, or particular sectors will grow faster. So we have to accept that not everything will grow at once. And the graph here is looking at the industry share of different cities at different stages of income. So you would often find quite a rise in manufacturing sectors, and then the richer cities would have a transformation towards financial services, creative industries, and so on. So you would have a differing balance as the city gets richer. Right. So the main part of the presentation is how do cities help growth occur? How do you make it happen? And obviously this is the sort of the question that if we really knew the answer to, then we would have already won the Nobel Prize and so on. So these are just a few observations. The first thing is that there are obviously many city rankings out there, and every year seems to be a new one, from the Economist Intelligence Unit, from McKinsey, from Kearney, from PwC, from Mercer's, and so on. So there are city rankings everywhere, and maybe if you're a mayor or you're a city administrator, you get very nervous. Where am I in the city ranking? Am I falling down the table, and so on. But it occurred to us that not many people are asking, do I do better as a city when I move up the rankings? So yes, I do better in terms of image, as we were saying, image takes a long time to build, and the rankings definitely help, as they have done at the national level in Georgia. But very strangely, we found that doing better on the rankings was not very tightly associated with growth of the city. So richer cities tend to do much better on the rankings, but if you compare poorer cities, amongst them, the ones that do better on the rankings are not necessarily growing faster. So that's not to say that the rankings are not useful. We should all be aspiring to livability and all the things that they measure. But it's not necessarily the silver bullet for generating growth. It can be useful, but it's not definitely going to get you where you want to be. So as well as these rankings, we found that there are actually a lot of different ways that cities can contribute to growth. And this is probably much too small to see, but what we tried to do was to look at all the different measures that cities can use. So you can talk about regulatory reform, you can talk about infrastructure investments, land reform, skills, building human capital, innovation measures, enterprise support, financing for firms. And to a certain extent, some of these can be done at city level. Obviously, we know that cities are in a tricky position because they don't have control over all of these. Often it's the national government that controls them, and often it's a state government or a regional government or a county government. So cities can't do everything, but they can actually do a surprising amount. And for the things that they cannot do, they can lobby. And this is what we found in many places, including in Changsha and in Gaziantep, the two cities I showed at the beginning. The cities have very, very active lobbying initiatives where they travel to the capital city, and importantly, they all ask for the same thing as each other, the people who are going. They don't ask for different things. We think this is a good idea, we think something else. There is a coordinated approach from the city to find the interventions that they think are really going to make a difference. Now, the next thing is, when you've got all of these tools available, how do you apply them to the problem that you have in the city? So what we wanted to emphasize here was that some initiatives, let's say waterfront development or building a new monument, can be extremely useful in some cities, but not in other cities. And it really depends on how the initiatives speak to the local economy that's already there. So there are many different things that cities can do, but to gear them to the needs of investors or to startups or to firms that are already there and need to grow, that was what made the difference. And I think I remember from the Baku presentation in the previous session, cities can be really creative in what they do. I mean, I thought the mention of the breakfast initiative to draw people to downtown Baku to have breakfast in Baku was I've never heard about that before. So I think it's a fantastic story, and it shows how creative you can be with the instruments that you have available as a city. Now, the other thing that we've heard is dialogue, and this is again something that we noticed a lot in the cities that we looked at. So in Gaziantep, for example, they have a very sophisticated way of involving lots of stakeholders. They have a city council and about 300 representatives of different economic stakeholders in the city involved. So the sector associations, the labor unions, the municipality, the university, all the stakeholders are involved in this structure. So there's a very intricate way of involving people and consulting them. They have working groups on particular topics. So when they want to take forward a transport initiative, there would be a working group on that, and they will come to a joint understanding of what needs to be done. So to sum up, what can be done at the city level? There can be a diagnosis of segments of strategic industries and of the opportunities available. There can be a convening of economic stakeholders, so that's the consultations and the filtering of priorities and so on. And there can also be the lobbying of national and regional governments to get what the city needs. Not every country is the same, so the scope for action can change according to how centralized or decentralized the country is. There are also a number of common mistakes which I think will be familiar to everyone in the room. First, on the strategy employed at the city level. There can be a lot of pressure for capture by incumbents, so the firms already in the city will do everything possible to make sure the strategy speaks to their needs, but that may not help them transform into new businesses or attract new investors. So this is tricky when you're putting a strategy together. Too many priorities, another problem. You often read an economic strategy and you find there are 19 or 37 or 84 priority initiatives, and obviously that's not possible unless you're superhuman. So how to have a manageable number of priorities. Then the link from analysis to strategy. Even if you have an excellent analysis underpinning the strategy, somehow the strategy is a little bit dislocated from the analysis. And then sometimes the objectives are just unrealistic. If you have every city wanting to be Silicon Valley or biotech center, it may not happen in most cases. Second big mistake, the budget. So I don't know how many people have read through a strategy and then seen that there is no budget described at all, or that there is a budget but it doesn't match up with a strategy. So a mismatch between the declared strategy and the actual budget. And we were very interested when we went to Baltimore in America, where they started with a strategy. They then zero rated all of the departments in the city. They removed their budget for the year. And they said, okay, you all have to compete for the budget according to the city's priorities. So you had no department was getting an assured budget. They all had to make the case for the budget for the next year. So there was no automatic continuity. So that's a pretty extreme example, but to adjust the budget closer to the strategy could be important. And then the third area of mistakes or problems is action. So when it comes to implementing the strategy, after we've got the glossy report and so on, then what happens? There will very often be a lack of accountability for who is responsible for every area of implementing the strategy. And there may be also an absence of risks being anticipated. So just to conclude, and I think I'm more or less on time, the three questions: how much local economic growth can we expect? So the answer that we were finding was that it varies a lot. You can have shrinking cities or super fast growing cities. It really depends on what cities are doing with their endowments. What does growth look like when it happens? So we talked about exportable goods and services being absolutely key to grow the local economy, and also that industries will grow at different speeds. And then the third question, how do cities help it happen? And this was the complicated bit. A vocabulary of different levers that can be applied. You can be extremely creative like Baku, the consultations with companies and investors, and attention to budget and implementation. So these are some kind of broad guidelines, I hope not too generic, and very happy to discuss more afterwards. Thank you.